Emergency lights bathed the Federation Council chamber in angry red as the final casualty report scrolled across dozens of screens. 17 expeditions into Omega Sector. 17 complete losses. The numbers glowed like accusations in the darkness, each digit representing hundreds of lives that would never return home. Dr. Vell's 6 eyes tracked different data streams simultaneously as she prepared her briefing for the assembled representatives. 12 species had sent their finest military minds to this meeting, and every one of them looked defeated before the discussion even began. The Girons clicked their beaks in nervous patterns. The stone-skinned bronze produced low rumbles of distress. Even the proud Phoenix warriors had stopped their usual battle songs. The creatures controlling Omega Sector represent something we've never encountered before, Dr. Vell began, her voice steady despite the gravity of her words. We've designated them Void Stalkers based on their hunting patterns and apparent invisibility to standard detection methods. Admiral, Chris felt her multiple hearts beating irregularly as the tactical display updated with the latest intelligence. 3 years of military operations had produced nothing but graves and unanswered questions. Every ship that entered the sector simply vanished, leaving behind only scattered debris and recordings of inhuman screams. Physical characteristics include an estimated height of 12 feet and natural armor plating that deflects energy weapons. Dr. Vell continued. They possess some form of advanced cloaking technology that renders them nearly invisible until they choose to attack. Most disturbing is their apparent intelligence and coordination. These aren't mindless beasts. They're sophisticated hunters who seem to enjoy psychological warfare. The recording played again, filling the chamber with the sounds of terror that had become all too familiar. Trained soldiers screaming not just in pain but in madness. The Void Stalkers didn't simply kill their prey. They broke them first, leaving elaborate displays of the remains as warnings to others who might dare enter their territory. Commander Stone of the human delegation raised his hand. Humans were still newcomers to the Federation, having joined only 50 years earlier, but they had earned respect for their tactical creativity and refusal to accept defeat. What exactly makes them so effective? Stone asked. Our reports mention cloaking and armor, but thousands of species have those capabilities. There must be something else. Dr. Vell activated a new display showing the few clear images captured by automated probes. Shadowy figures moved through asteroid fields with impossible grace, their forms seeming to bend space around them. What little could be seen suggested creatures built for one purpose: killing. Intelligence is their greatest weapon, Dr. Vell explained. They study their targets, learn their weaknesses, and strike with surgical precision. They don't attack randomly. They wait until their prey is most vulnerable, then coordinate attacks that leave no survivors and no hope of escape. The Giron representative spoke up, his translator converting his rapid beak clicks into Federation standard. Perhaps abandonment is our only option. Omega Sector may simply be beyond our ability to claim. Abandonment isn't possible, Admiral Chris replied firmly. The thallium crystal deposits in that sector power our defensive grids across 3 systems. Without those resources, we'll be defenseless against the next dark matter storm season. We need those crystals, or millions of Federation citizens will die. The debate that followed had become depressingly familiar. Some representatives argued for overwhelming force, suggesting they send every available ship to crush the Void Stalkers through sheer numbers. Others proposed developing new weapons specifically designed to counter the creature's abilities. A few even suggested negotiation, though no one could explain how to communicate with beings that seemed to view all other life as prey. Hours passed without progress. The Federation had faced dangerous alien species before, but never anything quite like this. Previous threats had understandable motives: territory, resources, survival instincts. The Void Stalkers seemed motivated by something far more sinister. They killed because they could. They hunted because they enjoyed watching others suffer. As frustration mounted and tempers flared, Lieutenant Ross burst through the chamber's sealed doors. Her face showed a mixture of excitement and confusion that stopped all conversation. "Admiral," she gasped, still catching her breath from running through the station's corridors. "We're receiving a transmission from Omega Sector." The chamber fell silent. No one had heard from Omega Sector in over 3 months, not since the final distress beacon from Mining Outpost 7 had gone dark. The silence from that region had been absolute. broken only by the electromagnetic storms that made long-range scanning impossible. "Verify the source," Admiral Chris ordered, her voice tight with disbelief. Lieutenant Ross consulted her portable scanner. "Confirmed, Admiral. The signal is definitely originating from within the Voidstalker territory. Single vessel broadcasting on standard Federation frequencies. Put it through." The communication system crackled with interference from the sector's notorious energy storms. Through the static, a voice emerged that sounded completely out of place in the crisis-filled chamber. It was relaxed, friendly, with the kind of casual tone someone might use when calling a neighbor to borrow tools. "This is Dave Miller aboard the mining ship Lucky Strike, looking to dock at Federation Station Alpha if that's possible. Got a cargo hold full of tylium crystals and some other interesting rocks you folks might want to take a look at. Been working the asteroid fields out here for a few months now. Good mining once you figure out the local conditions." Dr. Vell's 6 eyes blinked in rapid sequence, a sign of extreme confusion among her species. Admiral Chris felt her heart skip several beats. Commander Stone leaned forward in his chair, certain he had misheard something crucial. "Did he just say he's been mining in Voidstalker territory for months?" someone whispered. Lieutenant Ross checked her instruments again, hoping the readings would make more sense the second time. "Confirmed. Single human vessel, operating from coordinates that put it deep inside the restricted zone. Ship's registration matches a freelance mining operation." Admiral Chris found her voice, though it took effort to keep it steady. "Mr. Miller, this is Admiral Chris of the Federation Navy. Are you aware that you're operating in space classified as extremely hazardous? Omega Sector has been restricted due to hostile alien activity." The response came back with what sounded like a chuckle, as if Dave Miller found something amusing about the situation. "Oh, you mean those big lizard fellows? Yeah, they're around. Can be a bit of a nuisance when you're trying to work, but nothing too serious. They mostly stick to their own business if you don't bother them." The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs and frantic cross-checking of data. Dr. Vell activated every scanner at her disposal, certain there had been some error in the transmission coordinates. Commander Stone pulled up his own tactical displays, trying to reconcile what they were hearing with everything they thought they knew about Omega Sector. Dave Miller's voice continued, still carrying that same impossibly casual tone. "Look, I don't want to interrupt anything important, but I've been out here for 3 months without decent food or a cold beer. Any chance I could get clearance to dock sometime today?" Admiral Chris stared at the communication panel as if it might provide answers to questions she didn't know how to ask. In decades of military service, through first contact situations, space battles, and diplomatic crises, she had never encountered anything remotely like this. A single human, apparently working alone in territory that had claimed thousands of trained personnel, was requesting docking permission because he wanted a beer. The implications were staggering. Either Dave Miller was the luckiest being in the galaxy, or everything the Federation believed about Omega Sector was fundamentally wrong. There was also the disturbing possibility that humans possessed capabilities no one had bothered to document. "Permission granted, Mr. Miller," Admiral Chris finally managed. "Please proceed to Docking Bay 7. We'll have teams standing by for full debriefing and medical examination." "Much appreciated. Should be there in about 6 hours. Oh, and if someone could have a cold beer waiting, I'd be grateful. It's been a long few months out here." As the transmission ended, the chamber remained in stunned silence. Representatives from 12 species sat in quiet contemplation of what they had just witnessed. Somewhere in the most dangerous region of known space, a human miner was finishing his workday and looking forward to a beer. The terror of Omega Sector had just become infinitely more complicated. 6 hours later, the docking bay hummed with nervous activity as Federation personnel prepared for the most unusual arrival in the station's history. Security teams positioned themselves behind reinforced barriers, weapons powered but not raised. Medical staff waited with decontamination equipment and emergency treatment kits. Dr. Vell had her recording devices active, determined to document every moment of this unprecedented encounter. The Lucky Strike looked exactly like what it claimed to be, a working mining vessel that had seen better days. Scorch marks from asteroid processing dotted its hull, and welding patches covered spots where small meteorites had left their mark. It looked functional rather than impressive, built for hard work rather than combat. When the airlock finally opened, what emerged defied every expectation the assembled Federation personnel had formed during their anxious wait. Dave Miller stepped onto the deck wearing coveralls that told the story of honest labor. Grease stains decorated the fabric, and worn patches spoke of equipment repairs in difficult conditions. He carried a battered cooler in one hand and a standard mining helmet in the other. Work boots scuffed from months of use completed the picture of someone who earned his living with his hands. He was unremarkable in the way that made him remarkable. Average height for a human, with the soft build of someone who preferred thinking to fighting. Gray touched his brown hair at the temples, and smile lines around his eyes suggested someone who found reasons to be cheerful, despite difficult circumstances. He looked like a person you might meet at a neighborhood bar, not someone who had survived months in the galaxy's most dangerous territory. Quite a reception, Dave observed, taking in the security teams and medical equipment. Hope I didn't cause too much excitement. Your traffic control folks seemed pretty worked up during my approach. Dr. Vell approached first, her scientific curiosity overcoming her survival instincts. Mr. Miller, I am Dr. Vell, Chief Xenobiologist for the Federation. Would you consent to basic medical scanning? We need to verify that you haven't been exposed to dangerous organisms or radiation. Sure thing, Dave replied easily. Though I should warn you, I probably smell like engine coolant and rock dust. Been a while since I had access to proper washing facilities. The medical scanners revealed exactly what appeared before them. One healthy human male showing no signs of stress, radiation exposure, or alien contamination. His vital signs were actually better than average for someone who had just completed a long solo space journey. Whatever he had been doing in Omega Sector, it hadn't been traumatic. Admiral Chris descended from the observation deck, still struggling to reconcile what she was seeing with everything she knew about the region Dave claimed to call home. Mr. Miller, I need to ask you about your experiences in Omega Sector. Our records indicate that 17 military expeditions have entered that space. None returned. How did you manage to survive? Dave set his cooler on the deck and opened it, revealing several bottles of beer floating in melted ice. Mind if I grab one of these? It's been a long day. He twisted off a cap and took a long drink before continuing. As for surviving, I'm not sure what you mean. I've been working out there for 3 months without any real trouble. The Void Stalkers, Dr. Vell interjected, her voice tight with professional interest. Apex predators 12 feet tall with natural cloaking abilities and documented hostility toward all other species. Our intelligence indicates they control that entire sector. Dave nodded thoughtfully. Oh, those guys. Yeah, they're definitely around. I run into them pretty regularly, actually. They're not so bad once you get the hang of dealing with them. He took another drink. Anyone else want one? I've got plenty. Commander Stone stepped closer, abandoning his prepared list of questions in favor of direct inquiry. Mr. Miller, these creatures have killed thousands of trained military personnel. Are you telling us you've had peaceful interactions with them? Peaceful might be overstating things, Dave replied, offering Stone a beer. More like we've worked out a live and let live arrangement. They do their hunting, I do my mining. Our paths cross sometimes, but it's usually not a problem. Dr. Vell activated her recording equipment, recognizing that they were documenting something that would change Federation understanding of interspecies contact. Could you describe these encounters? Any information you provide could prevent future casualties. Dave settled onto a nearby cargo container, apparently comfortable despite being surrounded by armed personnel and scientific equipment. Well, the first time was about 2 weeks after I set up shop. I was taking a lunch break on my ship's loading ramp, enjoying a sandwich and a beer after getting my primary mining rig operational. He paused to take another drink, completely unaware of the tension his casual manner was creating among his audience. This big fellow comes drifting out from behind an asteroid cluster. Had to be every bit of 12 feet, just like you described. Black as deep space, with claws that looked like they could tear through my ship's hull without much effort. Definitely had that whole apex predator presence. Admiral Chris leaned forward. What was your response? Figured I had 2 basic options, Dave replied pragmatically. I could panic and probably get myself killed, or I could wait and see what he wanted. So I just kept eating my sandwich and drinking my beer. After a few minutes, he tilted his head like he was curious about something. That's when I realized he might be interested in my food. Dr. Vell's instruments recorded every word, though she struggled to believe what she was hearing. You offered food to a hostile predator? Seemed like good manners, Dave shrugged. I had more sandwiches than I could eat, and he looked curious. So I tossed him half of my turkey and Swiss. He caught it, gave it a good sniff, then swallowed the whole thing in one bite. Seemed to enjoy it. The docking bay had grown completely silent. Security teams had forgotten their defensive positions, caught up in a story that challenged everything they thought they knew about survival. After that, he just settled down across from me. Dave continued. Didn't make any threatening moves, just watched me finish my lunch. When I was done, I offered him a beer. Turns out they can't process alcohol, but he seemed to appreciate the gesture. Made this low rumbling sound that I eventually figured out was their version of being amused. Commander Stone found himself sitting on an equipment crate. You're saying you became friends with a Void Stalker over lunch? Larry's good company once you get used to him, Dave replied. That's what I call him anyway. Can't pronounce their actual names. He's pretty smart. Shows up every few days to check on my operation. Sometimes he brings family members. Dr. Vell nearly dropped her scanner. There are more of them. Oh, sure, they live in extended family groups. Larry's got a mate and a couple of youngsters. The kids are curious about everything, always investigating my equipment. I have to keep extra snacks around because they're growing and always hungry. Admiral Chris felt reality shifting around her. Mr. Miller, are you seriously telling us that you've established regular contact with multiple Void Stalkers and you feed their children? Well, when you put it that way, it sounds kind of strange, Dave admitted. But they were there first and I needed to work. Seemed easier to get along than to fight about it. He reached into his coveralls and produced a small metallic object that gleamed with an inner light. Actually, Larry gave me this about a month back. Haven't figured out what it does, but it seems important to him. Dr. Vell's instruments went wild as they detected energy signatures unlike anything in Federation databases. The object appeared to be constructed from materials that shouldn't exist, using manufacturing techniques that exceeded current Federation capabilities. This was a gift? She asked. Think so. Communication's still pretty basic between us, but he was pretty insistent that I keep it. Seemed like it meant something significant to him. Admiral Chris rubbed her temples, feeling the beginnings of a headache that had nothing to do with the station's artificial lighting. In the span of one conversation, everything the Federation believed about Omega Sector had been turned completely upside down. The galaxy's most feared predators were apparently capable of friendship, gift-giving, and peaceful coexistence with at least one human miner. Mr. Miller, she said finally, would you be willing to guide a scientific expedition back to Omega Sector? We need to verify these claims and document what you're describing. Dave finished his beer and stood up, stretching muscles that had been cramped during the long flight. Don't mind helping out, though I should mention that Larry and his family can be shy around strangers. Might take some time for them to warm up to new people. He looked around at the assembled security forces and medical teams. Probably best if we keep the weapons to a minimum. They tend to send the wrong message. As Dave was escorted to guest quarters for more detailed questioning, Admiral Chris found herself facing the most significant challenge to Federation doctrine in its history. Either they were dealing with the most extraordinary human who had ever lived, or they had been completely wrong about the nature of intelligence, aggression, and the possibility of peaceful first contact. The implications were staggering, and they all centered on one impossible fact. Somewhere in the most dangerous region of known space, a human miner had made friends with monsters. 2 weeks of preparation and bureaucratic debate later, the science vessel Pathfinder hung at the edge of Omega Sector like a nervous animal testing the wind. Dr. Lin gripped her instrument console so tightly her knuckles had gone white, running through system checks that she had already completed 3 times. As the Federation's leading expert on predator psychology, she had volunteered for this mission knowing it could well be her last scientific expedition. The ship's complement was deliberately small. 12 volunteers, minimal defensive systems, and enough emergency supplies to last a month if everything went wrong. Admiral Chris had personally approved the mission parameters based on Dave Miller's insistence that big shows of force make them cranky. Dave himself occupied the navigator's position, looking completely relaxed as he plotted their course through the asteroid field that marked the beginning of what had been forbidden territory. He sipped coffee from a thermal mug and occasionally pointed out mineral formations as if they were taking a casual tour of interesting geology. That greenish streak in the asteroid to starboard is concentrated dilithium, he mentioned conversationally, worth about 10 times what this ship cost. I've been saving that one for when I need to make a really big purchase. Dr. Lin tried to focus on her readings, but the data made no sense according to everything she knew about the region. Her sensors detected multiple large life forms throughout the area, but none were approaching their vessel. Previous expeditions had reported aggressive contact within minutes of entering Void Stalker space. They had been flying for over an hour without incident. "Mr. Miller," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady, "my instruments show numerous large organisms in our immediate vicinity. Based on previous reports, we should be under attack by now." Dave glanced at her displays and nodded approvingly. "Oh, they're definitely keeping track of us. Larry probably has scouts monitoring our approach from the moment we dropped out of hyperspace. They're just being polite about it." "Polite?" Engineer Ross looked up from her station. "We're talking about apex predators." "Sure, but they're not mindless killing machines," Dave replied. "They've got social structures, family relationships, territorial agreements. The problem is that most people who come out here are so ready for a fight that they never notice the social signals." Dr. Lin's instruments suddenly registered a massive energy signature approaching from their port side. "Contact. Large organism bearing 187 Mark 12. It's significant." Through the main view screen, they could see exactly what Federation terror reports had described. A void stalker moved through space with fluid grace that defied physics, its 12-foot form seeming to bend light around itself. Midnight black armor plating caught starlight in ways that made it difficult to track visually. Everything about it screamed apex predator. "That's Larry," Dave said with obvious warmth. "Right on schedule." The creature approached their ship with deliberate slowness, making no sudden movements that could be interpreted as aggressive. When it reached communication range, it performed what could only be described as a greeting gesture, raising one massive claw in a motion that resembled a wave. Dave activated the ship's external communication array. "Good to see you again, Larry. I brought some friends who wanted to meet you. Hope that's okay." The Void Stalker responded with a series of clicks and rumbles that Dr. Lin's universal translator couldn't process. Dave listened carefully and nodded as if he understood perfectly. "He says welcome to the neighborhood," Dave translated. "He's curious about our ship design. Apparently, our hull configuration is much different from the military vessels that usually show up here." Dr. Lin found her scientific training taking over her fear. "It can communicate complex concepts?" "Absolutely. They've got a sophisticated language system, mostly acoustic patterns with gestural modifiers. Took me a couple of weeks to pick up the basics. But Larry's a patient teacher." Larry moved closer to examine their vessel, his massive claws tracing the outline of their sensor arrays with delicate precision. The same claws that Federation reports claimed could slice through battle armor were being used with the care of a jeweler examining precious stones. "He's asking if we'd like to see where his family lives," Dave translated after another exchange of vocalizations. "It's quite impressive. They've carved living spaces into some of the larger asteroids." Engineer Ross looked skeptical. "They build structures?" "Wait until you see their work," Dave grinned. "These folks have been artists and engineers for a lot longer than humans have been spacefaring." Larry gestured toward a cluster of asteroids that Dr. Lin's scanners revealed was honeycombed, with artificial chambers and connecting tunnels. As they followed him through the field, more void stalkers appeared from concealment. Dr. Lin counted at least 10 individuals, each one perfectly capable of destroying their small research vessel. Instead of attacking, they seemed genuinely curious about their visitors. Several kept pace with the Pathfinder, examining it from different angles with obvious interest. "The one matching our starboard trajectory is Larry's mate," Dave explained. "I call her Linda. She's actually the decision-maker for their family group. The smaller ones playing around behind us are their offspring, probably equivalent to human teenagers in terms of development." Dr. Lin watched in amazement as one of the young void stalkers performed what looked like an aerial somersault, clearly showing off for their strange visitors. Another approached close enough to peer through the view screen with unmistakable curiosity. "They seem playful," she observed, hardly believing her own words. "Very much so. The young ones especially. They love investigating new things. I've had to secure all my equipment because they can't resist experimenting with buttons and switches." They reached Larry's home asteroid, and Dr. Lin gasped at what her instruments revealed. The natural rock had been shaped into an elegant structure that flowed seamlessly with the asteroid's original contours. Spiral tunnels connected multiple chambers, creating a complex that was both functional and beautiful. "How long did this take to construct?" she asked. "Larry says it's been in his family for many generations. They keep expanding it, refining the design. Each family group has their own asteroid complex throughout this system. More void stalkers emerged from the structure to observe their visitors. Dr. Lin counted over 30 individuals representing what appeared to be several related family groups. None showed any signs of hostility or territorial aggression. Dave opened his personal supply container and pulled out several packages. "I brought those protein supplements you folks like," he announced, "and some of those dried fruit snacks for the younger generation." The response was immediate and enthusiastic. The juvenile void stalkers performed excited aerial maneuvers, while the adults made pleased rumbling sounds that clearly indicated approval. Larry approached the ship and extended one claw palm up in an unmistakable request. Dave opened an airlock and carefully tossed out the packages. Larry caught them with surprising gentleness and began distributing them among his extended family. The scene was so domestic, so utterly normal, that Dr. Lin had to remind herself these were the same creatures that had terrorized 3 sectors of Federation space. "Mr. Miller," she said slowly, "how did 17 military expeditions get this completely wrong?" Dave sealed the airlock and settled back into his position. "Same way anyone gets things wrong when they're operating from fear instead of curiosity. They came in expecting a fight, weapons charged and shields up. The Void Stalkers? Actually, Larry tells me their real name translates roughly to Kethvar. Anyway, they responded to what they perceived as an invasion of their territory. But they killed thousands of Federation personnel," Engineer Ross protested. "And humans have killed each other throughout history," Dave replied matter-of-factly. "Doesn't mean we're incapable of friendship or cooperation." The Kethvar were defending their homes from what appeared to be heavily armed invaders. Once they realized I wasn't a threat, they were remarkably welcoming. Dr. Lin watched Larry's family enjoy their treats, her scientific worldview shifting with each observation. These creatures challenged every assumption she had made about predator behavior, territorial species, and the nature of intelligence itself. "What made you approach them differently?" she asked. Dave finished his coffee and smiled. "I treated them the way I'd want to be treated if strangers showed up in my backyard. With respect, openness, and a willingness to share what I had. Turns out that approach works pretty well regardless of species." Larry approached their view screen again and made a complex series of gestures and vocalizations. Dave watched carefully and nodded. "He's inviting us to join them for their evening meal," Dave translated. "Apparently Linda had a successful hunt today, and they'd like to share it with us. It's a significant honor in their culture." Dr. Lin realized she was witnessing the beginning of a complete revolution in interspecies contact protocols. The most feared predators in known space were offering to share food with strangers, simply because one human had taken the time to treat them with basic decency. "Tell him we would be deeply honored," she replied, meaning every word. 4 weeks of living among the Kethvar had filled Dr. Lin's research journals with observations that would fundamentally change how the Federation understood intelligence, society, and the nature of predation itself. She sat in Dave's expanded habitat, a comfortable dome that had grown from basic survival shelter into something approaching a proper home, watching him prepare for another day of work with the casual efficiency of someone following a familiar routine. The habitat told its own story of adaptation and cooperation. What had begun as standard emergency shelter had evolved through Kethvar engineering assistance into a structure that merged human comfort with alien architectural principles. Solar collectors designed with Kethvar efficiency improvements powered systems that neither species could have created alone. "Could you hand me that calibration tool?" Dave asked, his voice muffled as he worked inside the maintenance panel of his primary extraction unit. Larry's youngest got curious about the harmonic resonators yesterday. The kid's got real intuition about mechanical systems, but he hasn't quite grasped the concept of ask before disassembling. Dr. Lin passed him the requested tool while making another entry in her research log. The easy familiarity with which Dave discussed the Kethvar continued to provide insights into their social structure and individual personalities. In 4 weeks of intensive observation, she had documented behavioral patterns that overturned centuries of Federation assumptions about hostile species. "Dave, can you walk me through your initial contact again? I want to ensure I understand the exact sequence of events." Dave emerged from the equipment housing, wiping lubricant from his hands with a cloth that had seen considerable use. Sure, though I have to say it wasn't nearly as dramatic as everyone seems to think. Just practical problem solving, really. He settled into his favorite chair, a piece that had clearly been adapted for human anatomy by someone with only theoretical knowledge of human comfort requirements. Through the habitat's reinforced windows, they could see several Kethvar moving through their daily activities in the asteroid field. It was my second week of operations. I'd finally gotten my main extraction platform operational, and was feeling pretty good about the whole setup. Rich mineral veins, no competition for resources, ideal working conditions. I decided to take a proper break for the first time since arriving. Dave gestured toward his ship's loading area, still visible through the transparent aluminum. Set myself up right there with a portable chair, a cooler of beer, and a couple of sandwiches my neighbor back at Station Alpha had packed for the trip. Ham and cheese, if memory serves. And that's when you encountered Larry. Not exactly encountered. More like I gradually became aware that something was observing me. You know that sensation when you can feel someone watching you? Eventually, I looked around and spotted him maybe 40 meters away, just studying the situation. Dr. Lin consulted her detailed notes. Federation first contact protocols would have required immediate defensive measures and emergency beacon activation. Dave chuckled. Yeah, well, I never was much for following official procedures. Besides, he wasn't displaying any aggressive behaviors. Just seemed curious about what I was doing. Figured I'd let him be curious. You weren't concerned. Honestly, I was too exhausted to be worried. I'd been pulling 18-hour shifts trying to get my operation running efficiently. All I wanted was to eat my lunch and enjoy a cold beer in relative peace. When Larry showed up, my first thought wasn't dangerous predator. It was great. Now I have to deal with a neighbor situation. Through the window, Larry himself could be seen approaching the habitat. Over the past month, Dr. Lin had learned to identify individual Kethvar by their movement patterns, the subtle variations in their armor coloration, and their personal mannerisms. Larry moved with the confident pace of someone returning from productive work. He looks pleased about something, Dave observed. Probably located that rare metal deposit he's been tracking through the inner asteroid belt. They prospect for minerals? Dr. Lin asked, though by now very little about Kethvar capabilities surprised her. Excellent prospectors, actually. Superior to human methods in many ways. Their sensory organs can detect trace elements that our instruments miss completely. And they have an inherited understanding of geological formations that would impress university-trained geologists. Larry reached the habitat and performed his customary greeting sequence. A series of vocal patterns and gestural elements that Dave had taught Dr. Lin meant approximately, "Greetings, how has your work progressed today?" Dave responded with his own version of the greeting, which invariably seemed to amuse Larry. He's asking if we'd like to see his latest discovery, Dave translated after listening to Larry's explanation. Sounds like he's found some kind of crystalline formation that he thinks might interest me professionally. Dr. Lin activated her recording equipment. Every interaction between Dave and the Kethvar provided additional data about their communication methods, social hierarchies, and technological capabilities. Tell him I'd be very interested in examining his discovery, she said. The conversation continued for several minutes, with Larry describing his find using complex combinations of sound and movement. Dave asked clarifying questions and offered his own observations, occasionally pausing to explain portions of the exchange to Dr. Lin. He's located a natural crystal cave system about 3 hours from here, Dave summarized. The formations are unlike anything in his family's geological records, and he believes they might be connected to some form of natural energy source. He wants to guide us there tomorrow, but he's warning that the approach requires careful navigation. We'll need to use Kethvar guidance methods. They have advanced navigation systems. The Kethvar possess navigation capabilities that make our instruments look primitive. They can sense magnetic field variations, gravitational anomalies, even quantum-level fluctuations. Larry's family group has been mapping this asteroid system for multiple generations. Larry made additional comments, gesturing toward Dr. Lin's recording equipment with obvious interest. He's curious about your documentation devices, Dave translated. He wants to know if you're recording his discovery for scientific purposes. Dr. Lin nodded enthusiastically. Please tell him yes, and that his discovery could be extremely valuable for both our species' understanding of natural phenomena. Dave conveyed her response, and Larry's reaction was unmistakably pleased. He made the low, rumbling sound that Dr. Lin had learned indicated Kethvar amusement or satisfaction. He says he's honored to contribute to interspecies scientific cooperation, Dave translated. Apparently the Kethvar have been hoping for peaceful contact with other intelligent species for quite some time. This revelation caused Dr. Lin to stop her note-taking entirely. They wanted peaceful contact? Absolutely. Larry's shared stories about earlier times, before the Federation started sending military expeditions into their territory. The Kethvar used to encounter other species occasionally, and they generally managed to establish friendly relationships. Then why did they attack Federation vessels? Dave chose his words carefully. Imagine you're relaxing in your home when armed strangers break down your door and start making demands. How would you respond? The analogy was devastating in its simplicity. Dr. Lin realized that from the Kethvar perspective, every Federation expedition had been an armed invasion of their established territory by hostile forces. The first few encounters, Larry says they attempted communication, Dave continued. But Federation ships opened fire the moment they detected Kethvar presence. After several such incidents, they concluded they were dealing with an aggressive species and began responding with appropriate defensive measures. 3 years of conflict based on misunderstanding, Dr. Lin murmured. Not even conflict, really. More like a series of tragic communication failures. The Kethvar were protecting their territory, and the Federation was trying to claim resources they assumed were undefended. Neither side invested time in understanding what the other actually wanted. Larry made another series of comments, and Dave nodded thoughtfully before responding. He's asking if the Federation would be interested in establishing formal diplomatic relations. The Kethvar have been discussing the possibility among their family groups, and they believe it's time to attempt official contact. Dr. Lin felt her pulse accelerating. What kind of relations are they proposing? Primarily trade agreements. The Kethvar have access to mineral resources and energy technologies that the Federation requires. In exchange, they're interested in Federation developments in space travel, communication systems, and scientific methodology. And they're willing to share territorial access? Dave smiled. Larry says the asteroid system is large enough for everyone, assuming people remember basic courtesy and don't start shooting without attempting conversation first. Dr. Lin looked out at the asteroid field that had been classified as a death zone just 2 months earlier. Kethvar individuals moved peacefully through the space, some engaged in resource extraction, others maintaining their family habitats. It resembled any other inhabited system, except for the 3-year history of fear that had kept it isolated. How do we explain this transformation to Federation leadership? She asked. Same way you'd explain any successful first contact situation, Dave replied. 2 intelligent species learning to coexist. The only unusual element is that this time someone remembered to approach with friendship instead of force. Larry made one final comment before returning to his family's activities. Dave listened and laughed. He says when Federation representatives come for formal negotiations, they should bring plenty of those protein supplements. Word has spread among the Kethvar families, and everyone's curious about human food technology. As Larry disappeared into the asteroid field, Dr. Lin realized she was documenting the end of an era. The age of Omega Sector as forbidden territory was over. What would replace it was something unprecedented in Federation history, a genuine partnership between species that had begun with one human's decision to share his lunch. The Federation Assembly, all buzzed with an energy that hadn't been felt since the founding charter ceremonies 2 centuries earlier. Ambassador Torres adjusted her ceremonial diplomatic sash while watching technicians install communication equipment designed to translate languages that, until 6 months ago, had been classified as hostile. Vocalizations, the political implications of today's meeting were still reverberating through every level of Federation. Government Dr. Lin supervised the installation of her custom translation array, a sophisticated system built from months of linguistic analysis and field recordings. The device represented the first successful attempt to create real-time communication with a species the Federation had spent 3 years trying to destroy. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone present. Dave Miller occupied a seat in the advisory section, looking distinctly uncomfortable in the formal attire Ambassador Torres had insisted he wear for the occasion. He kept adjusting his collar and checking his timepiece, clearly preferring his usual work clothes and the familiar environment of his asteroid habitat. Mr. Miller, Ambassador Torres approached during a brief preparation period. Are you confident about the diplomatic protocols we've established? This represents completely uncharted territory for Federation contact procedures. Dave nodded, though his discomfort with the formal atmosphere was obvious. Larry's been preparing for this meeting for weeks. He's been practicing Federation standard with some of the other family leaders. His pronunciation has improved significantly, though their vocal structure makes certain sounds challenging. And you're certain they understand the significance of today's proceedings? Absolutely. The Kethvar take diplomatic ceremonies very seriously. Larry's brought representatives from 8 different family groups. In their social structure, that level of participation indicates maximum formal importance. Admiral Chris entered the hall carrying classified briefing materials that outlined the proposed framework for interspecies cooperation. 6 months of legal development had been required to create treaty structures for a species that had previously been designated as irredeemably hostile. The transformation challenged every assumption about Federation expansion policies. How's the translation system performing? Admiral Chris asked Dr. Lin. Better than our most optimistic projections, Dr. Lin replied, conducting final system checks. Dave's linguistic documentation was extraordinarily comprehensive. He managed to record not just vocabulary and grammar, but cultural context markers and social hierarchy indicators. It's remarkable work for someone without formal xenolinguistic training. Dave overheard the comment and shrugged. Spend enough time listening to anyone, you start understanding patterns. Larry's a good communicator, too. Very patient when I made pronunciation mistakes. The hall's main doors opened, and Federation security personnel took their designated positions. Unlike previous alien encounters that had required heavy military presence, these guards carried only ceremonial weapons. Dave had been emphatic about Kethvar's sensitivity to displays of armed force. They're approaching the station, announced Communications Officer Park from her monitoring station. Through the hall's main display screens, they could observe the Kethvar diplomatic vessels approaching Federation Station Alpha. The ships defied easy classification, appearing to have been cultivated rather than constructed. Their flowing lines and organic textures suggested technology that worked in harmony with biological principles, rather than imposing mechanical solutions on natural problems. Beautiful designs, Dave commented appreciatively. Larry gave me a tour of his family's vessel last month. They use biomechanical integration that's decades ahead of anything Federation engineers have developed. The lead vessel docked with the station's diplomatic facilities, and the hall fell silent as they waited for the delegation to emerge. Ambassador Torres took her position at the formal reception area, flanked by Admiral Chris and other senior Federation officials. The airlock opened, and Larry stepped through. Even after months of studying documentation and recordings, seeing a Kethvar in person remained an impressive experience. 12 feet of elegant biological engineering, moving with the fluid confidence that marked a successful apex predator. His natural armor caught the hall's lighting, creating subtle patterns that shifted as he moved. 6 other Kethvar followed Larry into the hall, each representing different family groups from throughout the Omega Sector region. They moved in a coordinated formation that spoke of centuries of diplomatic tradition and social organization. Welcome to Federation Station Alpha, Ambassador Torres began, her voice steady despite the historic nature of the occasion. I am Ambassador Torres, speaking for the United Federation of Planets. Larry responded with a complex sequence of clicks, rumbles, and gestural elements. Dr. Lin's translation system processed the acoustic patterns and converted them to Federation standard. Greetings, Ambassador Torres. I am known as Larry in the language of our friend Dave Miller. My formal designation translates approximately to Stonewalker of the Deep Currents. I speak for the 8 family groups of the Kethvar who inhabit the region you call Omega Sector. The translation carried subtle mechanical artifacts, but the meaning was unmistakably clear. Ambassador Torres felt a moment of surreal appreciation for the fact that she was conducting formal diplomatic negotiations with a being Dave had nicknamed after someone from his hometown. We are honored by your presence, Ambassador Torres continued. We recognize that misunderstandings have occurred between our peoples in the past. We hope today marks the beginning of a new era of mutual cooperation and understanding. Larry conferred briefly with his companions before responding. Past conflicts arose from fear and inadequate communication on both sides. We do not seek to assign responsibility, but rather to build foundations for future cooperation. Dave Miller has demonstrated that humans are capable of friendship and mutual respect. We hope this capacity extends to your Federation as a whole. Dr. Lin monitored her translation equipment, making minor calibrations to improve accuracy. The formal diplomatic language was more complex than the casual conversation she had recorded in the field, but Dave's linguistic foundation work was proving invaluable. We have prepared preliminary treaty frameworks, Admiral Chris interjected. Subject to negotiation and modification, of course. We're particularly interested in establishing trade, relationships and cooperative resource extraction agreements. Larry's response included what Dr. Lin recognized as subtle amusement markers in his vocal patterns. Admiral Chris, we are already familiar with your proposed terms through Dave Miller's informal discussions with our people. We find them acceptable in principle, though we have several modifications to suggest. Ambassador Torres concealed her surprise. Apparently, Dave had been conducting unofficial pre-negotiations without fully realizing the diplomatic significance of his conversations. What modifications do you propose? She asked. Your preliminary proposals focus primarily on mineral extraction rights and resource sharing. While we appreciate the economic benefits, we are more interested in cultural exchange and technological cooperation. We have much to learn from your Federation, and perhaps knowledge to offer in return. One of Larry's companions stepped forward and made a series of rapid acoustic signals. Larry listened carefully, then addressed the Federation delegation. Again, Stonesinger of the Light. Paths wishes to demonstrate something that might interest your scientists. The HFY representative produced a device that resembled a crystalline flower with delicate, translucent petals. As Stonesinger manipulated the object, it began emitting a soft luminescence that pulsed in complex rhythmic patterns. This is a quantum resonance communicator, Larry explained. It enables instantaneous communication across galactic distances without requiring the relay station networks. Your technology depends upon Dr. Lin's instruments, registered energy signatures completely outside Federation scientific understanding. The implications for communication technology, space exploration, and interstellar coordination were staggering. You're willing to share this technology? Ambassador Torres asked. Knowledge grows stronger when it is shared freely, Larry replied. In exchange, we would appreciate access to your medical databases and educational methodologies. Our younger generation is curious about human learning techniques and problem-solving approaches. Dave leaned forward from his advisory position. Larry's youngest has been asking about human engineering principles. The kid has real talent for mechanical systems and wants to understand different approaches to design problems. The negotiations continued throughout the day, covering everything from trade agreements to student exchange programs. The HFY proved to be sophisticated negotiators with comprehensive understanding of Federation political structures and economic systems. They had been preparing for this opportunity far longer than anyone had realized. As the formal sessions concluded, Larry approached Dave directly, speaking in the mixture of HFY and broken Federation standard they had developed during their months of interaction. Dave Miller, the 8 families have held discussions about your situation. We would like to offer you permanent residency status in our territory if you wish. Your presence would always be welcome among our people. Dave grinned and reached into his formal jacket, producing a small flask. I appreciate that, Larry. Though I should warn you, I'm pretty set in my ways. Hope you don't mind having a neighbor who sometimes has beer for breakfast. Larry made the deep rumbling sound that Dr. Lin had learned indicated HFY amusement. We would be honored to have such an interesting neighbor. Ambassador Torres observed the exchange with growing amazement. In 8 hours of formal diplomacy, they had accomplished more than decades of traditional Federation expansion had achieved. Trade agreements, technology sharing, cultural exchange programs, and most importantly, the foundation for lasting peaceful coexistence between species, all because one human had been willing to share his lunch with a curious stranger. As the delegations prepared to conclude the day's proceedings, Larry made one final formal statement. Ambassador Torres, we anticipate productive cooperation with your Federation. However, we want to establish one clear principle. Dave Miller will always be welcome in our territory, regardless of any political changes that might occur between our peoples. He has become family to us. The ceremony concluded with exchanges of gifts representing each species' technological and cultural achievements. The HFY presented Federation representatives with examples of their biomechanical innovations, while the Federation offered cultural artifacts and samples of human cuisine that Dave had specifically recommended. As the HFY delegation prepared to return to their ships, Larry pulled Dave aside for a private conversation in their mixture of languages. "They're planning to offer you some kind of official position," Dave explained afterward. "Something about being a cultural liaison or interspecies relations specialist. Would you consider accepting?" Dr. Lin asked. Dave finished the contents of his flask and smiled. "Might be interesting work, though I'd want to make sure I could continue some mining operations. A person needs to stay busy with practical work." The transformation of Omega Sector from forbidden territory to the center of interspecies cooperation was complete, and it had all begun with one human's simple approach to making friends. Be kind, share what you have, and treat everyone with respect until they give you a specific reason not to. 18 months after first contact, the space that had once been known as the Forbidden Omega Sector had transformed into the most successful example of interspecies cooperation in Federation history. What had been a death zone was now bustling with activity as human engineers, HFY families, and representatives from a dozen Federation species worked side by side in the rich mineral fields. Dave Miller stood on the observation platform of Harmony Station, watching a group of young HFY receive safety certification from human instructors, the sight of beings who had once been considered the deadliest predators in the galaxy. Learning proper equipment protocols from species they had supposedly terrorized would have been unthinkable just 2 years earlier. Production efficiency reports continue to exceed all projections, noted Station Administrator Chen, reviewing her quarterly data while joining Dave at the viewing area. She had arrived 8 months earlier to oversee the expansion of joint operations and was still adjusting to the casual interaction between species that had recently been at war. Larry's extended family group has increased rare mineral extraction by 400%, she continued, consulting her electronic reports. Their natural geological sensing abilities have revolutionized our understanding of asteroid composition and extraction techniques. Dave nodded, enjoying his morning coffee while watching Larry himself demonstrate proper tunnel stabilization methods to a mixed class of human and HFY apprentices. The big fellow had discovered a talent for teaching that matched his enthusiasm for learning, and his technical courses were consistently overbooked. "He's got a real gift for explaining complex concepts," Dave observed. Last month, he helped the Chen Mining Consortium solve a structural integrity problem they'd been struggling with for half a year. Took him maybe 15 minutes to identify the issue. Through the station's communication system, Larry's translated voice could be heard explaining the subtleties of mineral stress analysis to his engaged students. His Federation standard had improved dramatically over the months, though he still had difficulty with certain sound combinations that didn't exist in HFY vocal patterns. "Mr. Miller," Administrator Chen said, checking her appointment schedule, "you have a priority communication with Admiral Chris in 30 minutes. Something about extending the cultural cooperation program to additional sectors." Dave finished his coffee and sighed. His unofficial position as humanity's first alternative species relations coordinator had evolved into something far more complex than he had ever anticipated. What had begun as simple translation assistance had grown into advising on Federation expansion policies, first contact procedures, and interspecies conflict prevention. "Any indication what they want to discuss this time?" he asked. "The Proxima Centauri situation, most likely. Intelligence reports suggest we have another misunderstood species encounter developing. Something called phase drifters. They've been interfering with Federation survey operations." Dave raised an eyebrow. The pattern was becoming disturbingly familiar. Unknown species immediately classified as hostile after problematic first contact, territory declared restricted while military strategists developed combat solutions. 18 months ago, he might have accepted this as normal procedure. Now he suspected there was more to the story. "What do we know about these phase drifters?" Administrator Chen accessed the intelligence files on her tablet. "Limited information. They appear to be energy-based entities capable of manipulating space-time fields. They've disabled 4 survey vessels, but interestingly, they've never pursued ships that withdrew from their region. Territorial behavior. Dave mused. Same pattern we saw with the Kethvar. Has anyone attempted peaceful contact? Military command considers them too dangerous for diplomatic approaches. They're organizing a heavy cruiser battle group for deployment next quarter. Dave looked out at the thriving activity throughout the former danger zone, where the two dangerous Kethvar were helping human children with their science projects in the station's educational center. Larry's youngest had formed a particularly close friendship with the daughter of one of the engineering supervisors, and the two could often be seen exploring the station together, with the young Kethvar carefully moderating his strength to avoid accidentally injuring his much smaller companion. I think I'll suggest a different approach, Dave said. The priority. Communication with Admiral Chris proceeded exactly as Dave had expected. Federation military leadership remained convinced that the phase drifters represented a clear threat to expansion efforts. They possessed advanced capabilities, controlled strategically valuable territory, and showed no interest in standard communication protocols. The solution, from their perspective, was obvious and final. Mr. Miller, Admiral Chris said through the secure communication link, I value your expertise in these matters, but the phase drifters aren't comparable to the Kethvar. They're energy beings existing in multiple dimensional phases. We can't exactly invite them for coffee and conversation. Dave settled back in his chair, thinking about his first encounter with Larry and the assumptions everyone had made about impossible communication. Admiral, respectfully, we didn't understand the Kethvar either. We just assumed they were hostile because they protected their territory when we tried to claim it. The phase drifters have damaged Federation property and endangered personnel. So did the Kethvar. But they stopped when we stopped treating them as enemies and started treating them as neighbors. The Admiral's frustration was evident even through the encrypted video connection. What exactly are you proposing? Let me take a small, completely unarmed vessel into their space. Just me and maybe Dr. Lin for scientific documentation. No weapons, no military escort, no territorial claims. Just a peaceful visit to understand what they actually want. Absolutely not. The risk is unacceptable. Dave smiled. That's exactly what you said about Omega Sector. 4 weeks of administrative negotiations later, Dave found himself piloting a small research vessel toward the Proxima Centauri region. Dr. Lin occupied the co-pilot's position, her instruments configured to record whatever they encountered. This time they carried several pieces of advanced Kethvar technology, gifts from Larry's people to help with the mission. Larry was very insistent we take this, Dr. Lin said, examining a crystalline device similar to those the Kethvar had demonstrated during diplomatic meetings. He believes it might facilitate communication with energy-based entities. Dave accepted the device, admiring its elegant construction. Did he explain the operating principles? Something involving quantum resonance harmonics and dimensional frequency matching. Honestly, Kethvar technology remains largely beyond human understanding, but Larry seemed confident it would prove useful. As they approached phase drifter territory, Dave found himself considering patterns of behavior that seemed universal among intelligent species. Every group the Federation had encountered followed predictable responses when they felt threatened. Territorial defense, protective aggression, and communication attempts that were frequently misinterpreted as attacks. Contact detected, Dr. Lin announced, her instruments registering energy signatures completely outside Federation scientific parameters. Multiple entities approaching our position. Through the main view screen they could see them. The phase drifters lived up to their designation, appearing as shifting patterns of light that seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time. They moved like living mathematics, their forms constantly changing as they processed information through methods that defied conventional understanding. They're scanning our vessel, Dr. Lin reported. But the energy patterns don't feel aggressive. More like scientific inquiry. Dave activated the Kethvar communication device. It immediately began generating harmonic frequencies that seemed to capture the phase drifters' attention. Their energy patterns became more organized and focused, suggesting active interest. I think they're attempting communication, Dave said. The largest phase drifter approached their ship, its energy field creating spectacular light displays across their hull. Dave thought of Larry's initial greeting, the careful way he had announced his presence without making any movements that could be interpreted as threatening. Hello, Dave said into the communication system, uncertain if they could understand but feeling compelled to try. We're visitors to your region. "We come in peace." The response was immediate and unmistakable. The phase drifter's energy patterns shifted into organized rhythmic sequences. The HFY device translated the patterns into approximate concepts: curiosity, welcome, and questions about their intentions. "They want to understand our purpose here," Dr. Lin translated, reading the device's interpretations. "Tell them we're explorers, trying to learn about different forms of life. We heard about them and wanted to meet them respectfully." The conversation developed over several hours, with the phase drifters demonstrating remarkable intelligence and sophisticated social organization. They were researchers themselves, students of dimensional physics who had been investigating the galaxy's space-time structure for eons. Their interference with Federation ships had been attempts to study the unusual energy signatures of advanced propulsion systems, not hostile actions. "They didn't realize the vessels contained living beings," Dr. Lin explained as communication became clearer. To them, the ships appeared to be interesting physical phenomena worth investigating. They had no understanding they were causing harm. Dave reflected on the tragic simplicity of the situation. Another case of species operating on completely different assumptions, making conclusions based on incomplete information. The phase drifters weren't hostile entities. They were scientists, trying to understand visitors who kept responding to scientific curiosity with military force. 8 months later, the Proxima Centauri region had become the Federation's third major success in alternative species relations. The phase drifters' mastery of dimensional physics had revolutionized Federation transportation technology, while human and HFY scientific methodologies had provided them with new tools for investigating reality itself. Dave found himself promoted to Director of Alternative Contact Operations, with authority to investigate potentially hostile species before military solutions were implemented. His methods remained unconventional by traditional Federation standards, but the results spoke for themselves. The approach was elegantly simple: assume intelligence, offer friendship, and always bring something to share. "You know," Larry told him during one of their regular conversations, "the galaxy contains countless species that have been waiting centuries for someone to approach them with curiosity instead of weapons." Dave nodded, observing the thriving multi-species community that had developed around Harmony Station. Humans, HFY, phase drifters, and representatives from 15 other species worked together in cooperation that would have been unimaginable 3 years earlier. "Maybe that's humanity's real strength," he mused. "Not conquering or controlling, but connecting. Turns out the universe is much more welcoming when you treat everyone as potential friends instead of potential enemies." The transformation of the galaxy's most feared regions into centers of learning and cooperation had become the Federation's new standard for expansion. Military conquest was being replaced by cultural exchange, scientific collaboration, and mutual respect. As Dave often explained to new contact specialists during their training programs, the secret to dealing with so-called monsters wasn't superior technology or overwhelming force. It was remembering that behind every threat was usually just someone who wanted to be understood, respected, and perhaps invited to share in the great adventure of learning about the universe. The cosmos, it turned out, was full of friends waiting to be discovered. You just had to be brave enough to offer them respect and see what wonderful things might happen next.